Okay, I'm going to very briefly describe to you how to organize a paper that presents a discussion of instructions or process descriptions. First, we need to know the difference between instructions and process descriptions. Instructions are written to inform people how to carry out a task that you expect the readers might complete themselves. A process description, on the other hand, explains how a task is or was performed, but they're written with the expectation that the readers will not actually complete the task himself or herself. For example, you might describe the process by which the universe was created according to the Big Bang Theory. Nobody is going to create a universe. So the process description is written somewhat differently from the instructions, and we're going to talk about how they're differentiated. One thing they have in common is that they both use chronological order. What is or was done first is discussed first, and what is or was done second is discussed second, and so forth. And what that means is that your paper won't be in emphatic order. For example, let's say that you're writing a process description on how brain surgery is performed, and you're not writing it to surgeons, you're writing it to students who are studying medicine, but possibly studying nursing, for example. You don't expect these people to actually perform brain surgery. You're just telling them how it's done. Now, if you're writing a process description on brain surgery, you'll have a section on diagnosing the illness that requires the surgery, and then explaining the procedure to the patient, and then preparing the patient for surgery, and then doing the surgery, and then finally you'll have a section on monitoring the results of the surgery. Well, the longest section of the paper is going to be performing brain surgery, because that's the most complex task. It will not appear last. So the final reason in Tolman terms that's discussed in your paper will not necessarily be the longest. What will be the longest is the portion of the process, or whether it's an instruction or a process description, that requires the most steps. Okay, now let's talk specifically about organizing instructions. You will use one of the 6 methods of introduction that's discussed in the introduction and conclusions handout. In some cases, a story or an anecdote might be good. But remember that broad statement is always acceptable, and for instructions, usually it is the best choice. Now, one thing that you need to do is to divide the required actions into groups. For example, gathering tools, preparing the workspace, and then a series of steps. For example, if I were going to write instructions on how to put together a website, I might divide the groups into writing text and preparing graphics, composing the web page, and posting the web page to a server. So those would be the 3 steps, the 3 general categories of steps that I'm going to be discussing. And then I would write a claim that lists those tasks. So, for example, I might say, in order to compose and post a web page, graphics and text must be produced. The web page must be composed in a web page editor, and the web page must be posted to a server. That would be my claim, because those would be the large categories of reasons that I'm going to discuss. If you have any questions about how to do that or what that means, make sure you email me. Okay. Now, after you have your claim at the end of your introduction, you might have a background that includes what the task is designed to accomplish. Obviously, for a lot of things, what it's designed to accomplish is pretty much what it is. What you're trying to do when you design a web page is you're trying to design a web page. But there might be some kinds of instructions that need more explanation than that. That's probably going to be pretty rare, given that you're addressing an academic audience, but if you do need that kind of an explanation, that's where you'd put it. Okay, now, this is very important. You need to write a paragraph that indicates all the tools that a person needs before they begin the project. And you need to be specific as possible and provide any needed definitions. For example, using my web page example, one of the things that I would recommend is a program that provides an HTML editor. Now, if I'm writing to people in computer sciences, they'll know what an HTML editor is. But if I'm writing to, for example, people studying communication or studying media or even studying English, they might not know what an HTML editor is. So this would be a place that when I discuss my tools, I would want to define what that is. Certainly, if you're talking about replacing an engine in a car and you're addressing an academic audience in auto repair and maintenance, your audience would know what the basic tools are. But there might be specialized tools that are needed for installing an engine that you need to provide a definition for. I wouldn't have any idea what they are because I don't even know what the engine of a car looks like. So I'm not even going to try to guess at an example of that. But I think you get an idea of what I mean. Next, you would discuss the first group of tasks in chronological order. Going back to my web page example, I would discuss the group of tasks that involves preparing text and graphics. Next, I would discuss the second group in chronological order. Going back to my web page example, that section would focus on how to actually put the text and graphics into a web page editor. And in some cases, how to check HTML code. And I'd keep doing this until the task is completed. The last thing I would discuss is how to upload a web page to a server. Okay. This will not necessarily be in emphatic order. Because what is going to be the longest in the paper is the group of steps and tasks that require the most work and require the greatest amount of explanation. Using my web page example again, probably the longest section would be on actually composing a web page. It wouldn't take that much of an explanation to explain how to upload it to a server. That's not that complicated. Actually putting together a web page, particularly if you're working with some HTML coding, that can be kind of complicated. So the last section of my paper would be on uploading the web page to a server because that's the last thing that's done, but it wouldn't be the longest section of my paper because it's not the most complex task. Therefore, it's not in emphatic order. One of the things that you have to do is to remember to be as specific as possible in your paper and provide any definitions that you need throughout the paper. If people are going to be following the instructions, they need to know exactly what you're talking about. Don't say add some oil if what you mean is add 2 quarts of oil, because some oil could be 1 quart of oil or 3 gallons of oil. You need to be specific. And this is a little tricky in writing instructions, but because this is an academic paper, you have to design your sentences to avoid use of the second person pronouns you, your, yours, etc. Okay? Instead of saying take your wrench and blah blah blah, say take the wrench and blah blah blah. Okay? Okay, let's move on to how to organize process descriptions, because it's basically the same, but it's a little bit different. Again, you would use one of the 6 methods of introduction from the Introductions and Conclusions handout. And again, you would divide the actions into groups. And let's say that we're talking about brain surgery, okay? And the groups might be that the illness is diagnosed, the procedure is explained to the patient is prepared for the procedure, the patient undergoes the procedure, and results are monitored. Remember, you are writing this probably to nursing students, somebody who is not already an MD who is doing a specialty in neurology or surgery. Then you would compose a claim that lists the groups that those tasks are divided into. In this example, you might say, when brain surgery is performed, the illness is diagnosed, the procedure is explained to the patient is prepared for surgery, the patient undergoes surgery, and results of the surgery are monitored. So you just list those groups of actions, not each individual action. Okay? Generally, you don't need a list of tools. They're not going to be performing brain surgery. They're not going to be creating a universe according to the Big Bang Theory. They're not going to be following the instructions, so they really don't need a list of tools. That's one of the ways that a process description is different from instructions. But most of the rest of the paper is very, very similar to instructions. You discuss the first group of tasks in chronological order. For example, you discuss how a brain tumor is diagnosed. Then you discuss the second group in chronological order, how the procedure is explained to the patient. And you continue to do that. After that, you would discuss how the patient is prepared for the procedure. Then you'd have a section on how the brain surgery is actually done, and then you would have a section that discusses how the results are monitored. It won't be in emphatic order. Obviously, in this case, how brain surgery is done is going to take the most explanation, and it will be the longest. But after you talk about how the brain surgery is done, you will talk about how the results are monitored. Therefore, the longest section in the paper, the section that has the most data, will not be the last section of the paper. It's not emphatic order. It's more or less chronological order. So don't try to force emphatic order on the paper. Again, be specific and provide definitions as needed throughout the paper. It's not as necessary to be as specific in a process description as it is in instructions. For example, when a patient is undergoing any kind of surgery, it's good to make sure that there is a sufficient amount of blood in the blood bank in case it's needed. You don't have to say how much blood that is, because the person reading the process description isn't actually going to check with the blood bank to see how much blood they have. It's not the same as telling people how much oil they have to put in a car. Okay, that concludes my presentation on how to write instructions and process descriptions. I hope it helped. If you have any questions at all, you can always contact me by emailing me at deborah.oki@csn.edu. And of course, if you do email me, you're going to email me from an account other than Canvas. Thanks a lot for your attention. I do hope this little video helped, and I also hope that you have some time to relax and enjoy yourself today.